Chapter 8, Elise. I woke up to quite what I hadn't expected. The kind of hush that arrives after a storm when the world holds its breath and the small sounds, kettling setting, 2 spoons clinking. A half laugh remembered that felt louder previously, even being more rare now. Light had pulled at the edge of the curtain, and the cabin smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. For a moment, I let myself float in that small safety, unwilling to accept the weekend was nearing its end. We had arrived as friends, so we thought. But after we got familiarized with one another, through conversations that began as edges softened into sometimes softer, sometimes kinder, other times harsher, colder, and quieter, we realized we were 8 perfect strangers trying to just connect. I had watched people reveal themselves in ways of a joke abandoned mid-laugh, a hand reaching without asking, a silence that said more than the words itself. It had become without ceremony a place to test ideas of loyalty and desire and who they thought they wanted to be when they left the noise outside. Downstairs at this moment, Noah was making coffee with that slow, careful movement that I liked. Those small domestic gestures that stopped feeling ordinary in the company of others. By the time I walked in, he had glanced up. I was shuffling my feet. They folding a tea towel over his arm as though to hide his willingness to be useful. He smiled as I arrived. It was like a fact. Morning, he said, and he'd carried all the steadiness that I had become accustomed and depended on. At that moment, Jordan and Camille popped their heads up, and they too, with a more or so less reluctant good morning smile. And then there was Harper and Lucas. They were already there. They too leaning, although close, across the table, sharing a sugar packet as Lucas drew their sugar into a love heart on the table. They shared a private joke, just glancing up to see me before going back to looking at that love heart made out of sugar. Harper's face was bright in a way that I just couldn't quite place. I guess it was contentment, brash with a new kind of ease. And Lucas, he was just laughing. It came so easy to him. The two of them moved through the room almost as one body. Watching them made me feel both warm and oddly bereft, as if some inward measure of possibility had become counted on and found wanting. I glanced back at that moment towards Jordan and Camille. Jordan was more remote, more than ever. Sat by the window with a mug pressed between both hands like a shield. He watched Camille with an unreadable tilt in his jaw, and then he turned his gaze to the lake as if the water might provide the answer he never found in her or in us this weekend. I had tried earlier that entire weekend to draw him out, to offer a joke, to lean into a conversation, and he just gave back measured replies, each one precise enough to be polite and distant enough to be safe. On the other hand, Ethan had become quieter than usual. There were moments when his eyes wandered to mine, something like a map, tracing, planning, and then he would look away as though afraid of naming what he felt. Maya, bright and patient and wholly unshakable, moved through the group with the confidence of someone who knows how to carry herself. There was a tenderness of Ethan that hovered unannounced like a song waiting for its hook. They ate breakfast together, the easy choreography of people who have been through and with each other and know each other's routine. Conversation ricocheted from the trivial, who had forgotten wine at the store earlier the weekend, to the heavy, who had slept poorly and why, and the room widened to fit all of it in. I listened more than I spoke, letting the rhythm of the group describe itself. There were edges between them, small fixtures that opened and closed with the passing of a laugh. Later, I think it was Camille, she suggested that we all take kayaks out. I found myself agreeing before I even realized why. I guess it was easier to sit in a boat and watch the world move than to invent a conversation that might reveal too much. The lake was glass that morning, holding the trees like a photograph. Lucas and Harper took one boat, Ethan and Maya another one, Jordan and Camille, well, they were in a boat, but I don't know if they were together. While I and Noah pushed off in tandem, that fit there in our ease of silence. Paddles stilled, our boat drifting while others paddled further out. "You okay?" Noah asked, voice low as if a question were an offering he didn't expect to be accepted. I closed my eyes against the sun. "I'm thinking," I said. It was true and not so true. What I was thinking included the small calculus of who I was when I was alone and who I had become when I let these people in, especially Noah. It included the ache of seeing Lucas and Harper and the understanding that intimacy looks like different things for different people. It included a stubborn private knowledge that it couldn't be everything everyone wanted. Back at the cabin that afternoon, unraveled in the way of hours that are too full to be named. There was a card game on the built-in bench that grew louder until someone suggested they move it outside. I guess Jordan came out, but it wasn't such a competitive and laughing nature. It was more baiting Camille, like the last test. I guess it was expected. It was the last hurrah, start an argument. But Camille didn't take the bait. I watched their faces as cards were played and discarded. I looked at Harper, animated. Lucas, deliberate. Even this time, Ethan and Maya joined in. I guess working out could wait. We're working out other issues now. There was this moment when their hands, and by there I mean Harper and Lucas, brushed each other, reaching for the same card, and then something in Harper's expression shifted. The game for a beat became more than play. I found myself thinking about stories, the ones where we tell others and the ones where we tell ourselves. The weekend had been full of both. There were confessions and whispers in the kitchen at 2 a.m, laughter that had cracked open quieter conversations and small betrayals held like fragile keepsakes. A glance that meant more than it should, a joke that hid a hurt. Some of those things would become myths. They would be told later. Others would be secrets they carried alone. Secrets like the boys had in the car. Yes, Noah, he's too good. He told me everything. As the sun dipped, they gathered around the fire. Someone stumped a guitar poorly and was rewarded with boisterous encouragement. The wine bottle made the rounds, and the conversation loosened into the territory of confessions and dares again. I took a chance and I told a story about my mother, since I'd been asked truth or dare, and I felt too childish to take a dare. There's a small and sharp memory that made everyone laugh and then look at me differently, not unkindly, but with the fulcrum of information shifted, just enough to make the present feel fuller. At that moment, Noah leaned in when I spoke, that same steady gravity. Later, when the others dispersed to their cabins, Harper paused near me and said something half-joking about the way she loved seeing me and Noah. I guess when your life is going right, because Lucas and her had obviously overcome a hump, or so we thought. He was trying. I guess you think everyone else is also overcoming their problems. It wasn't intrusive. It wasn't something that was unexpected. It was just more an observation of someone who had seen them in a handful of moments and imagine the rest would be as great. Smiled, one of those polite smiles, showing that I was surprised at how Harper was sort of clear and kind for her observation. Packing up was cinematic stillness. Although it was slow and a reluctant ritual, I could hear the rustle of tree limbs to the distant laughter of other couples and some harsh words or still silentness. Even the boat rocking down gently at the shore. And I thought of how beautiful it had been, all of us here, in one place at one time. The decision to postpone anything else, the feeling to choose to stay rather than go and be wherever else this world wanted us. We're here in this space. The cabin, it had been generous, it had been honest, and so had we. And so there we were, bags being zipped, laundry folded, last minute leftovers stuffed into containers. Finally, we all reached the car, hands moved with a practiced choreography of people who know each other enough to help without asking. Lucas and Harper, they argued humorously about who had left a sock in the dryer. Ethan held the cooler with both hands and stole glances at Maya and said he wanted to say something, but didn't know how to begin. I slid into the passenger seat next to Noah, interior smelling faintly of sunscreen and the old upholstery's memory. The engine coughed to life, and the 4 cars lined up like a procession. There was a kindness in the silence they shared, a mutual understanding that the weekend had changed some of them in ways they couldn't yet name. Across the gravel was Jordan and Camille's car, and it roared to life, and UGK's The National Players Anthem burst out, bass filling the afternoon. It was weird. At that very moment, Camille decided to take a swig of the Chardonnay. I don't know. It was kind of ridiculous, but perfectly timed out, a soundtrack that announced they were back to the world. I felt for them. But then, Ethan and Maya started their engine. And all of a sudden, Willie Hutch's I Choose You drifted soft and soulful over the edges, like an offering. I smiled at the coincidence. Music seemed to be narrating the moment by moment. And then, as if it was scripted, Lucas and Harper's car turned on, and there was no music playing. I glanced at Noah, and he looked amused as he shifted the car into gear. We turned on our car, and I turned down the song that was playing. I'd have rather listened to I Choose You. And as I caught the cabin in the rearview mirror, as we pulled away, a small rectangle framed by trees, the smoke from a dying fire still rising in the chimney. The image shrank until it vanished, but the feeling of it didn't. The weekend wasn't ending. It was folding into each of us. The colors, who would become, who we were, what we were returning to. As we drove, conversation drifted from what we had just gone through to plans of when we get back, what was for dinner, what time we needed to go to bed, and what we needed to do on Monday morning. But under the small talk, something else hummed. There was a sense of we're gonna make it. I realized I was leaving with a different set of possibilities. Not because of anything dramatic that had happened, but because I'd watched people and seen how they choose to be. I'd felt calmer about the things that I couldn't fix and braver about the things that I could. Noah reached over and brushed a loose strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering as if an anchor, both of them, in the ordinary. Was it what you expected? He asked me softly. I considered the question. Not exactly, I answered honestly. But it was what we needed. I turned to him for a second. The world narrowed to the space between us, and there was quite a mutual understanding, a fragile and careful trust. Behind us lay the highway, unfurled, and I watched the trees slide by and felt unexpectedly grateful for what we had. Yeah, Lucas had come up and told me what Noah had said when the guys were in the car. He was a good friend, and I knew I had a decision to make, but it wasn't as if I didn't know that part of Noah's life. I just felt for Lucas and the weight that he had to bear to tell me and what he took. I guess he was breaking guy code. I opened my mouth and I asked Noah a question. Do you think that Ethan and Maya are going to make it? Noah pondered as he looked at the highway. We were speeding down. It was a matter of just hours before we were home. But he didn't take the entire time. He considered it for minutes, and he said, I think they'll have a kid, and I think they'll separate after that. I just don't see them working out in the long run, the entire distance. I don't see them making it. I thought about what he said. I thought about how long it would take for us to get home. And if they were in the car right now, one of them was about to get off. He looked at me and said, well, do you think Jordan and Camille are going to make it? On that moment, as we looked at the houses, the first bend opening up, the city noise gathering around us like a shawl, we reached for our hands, and I grabbed and squeezed his. And I said, I hope they do, but I could see them also having a kid, but I don't think Jordan is ever going to commit. I think Jordan he's cake, and he eats ice cream too. At that moment, the NMC of the cabin dulled in memory, but the traces remained. A laugh, a silence, a song. And finally, I looked at him and I said, Lucas and Harper won't make it. He squeezed my hand back, as if the cabin were traces of souvenirs that we both understood the coordinates of where they lie on the map. He didn't have to say anything. We both knew that they wouldn't. They would go their separate ways. The proof was in the pudding. Neither of them wanted to put in the work. They just wanted to say no. Finally, he looked at me and said, but we'll make it. I looked at him with a smile, and I said, 2 kids, a white picket fence. Of course we will, babe. The car sped on, and I looked at the GPS routing us home, and I was mindful and aware of our love. That we would have to keep on working together, tackling problems and not fighting each other. The road stretched ahead, and so did the horizon. I didn't look back at that moment. I was just there. I was there with my teammate. I knew if we stayed patient, no matter the detours, and if we gave grace and remembered that this nation was not a place, but a life that we were building together, then would last whatever journey it was, because this was home. This was it. We were the team.